Check Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital. I'm your host, Rob Shaw from Check TV. We are back after an extended Easter break. The legislature is back. There's political news galore, and this week we're going to talk about the family doctor crisis, the F-bomb heard through BC politics, and also crime issues and a new report on policing in the province. To break it all down, we've got our political panel here each and every week. You know them. We have Katy Merrifield from Wellington Advocacy. We have Jeff Ferrier from Hill and Knowlton. We have Jillian Oliver, Green Strategist Extraordinaire, and Maclean K from the Orca here. Thank you, all of you, for being here each and every week to help people understand BC politics. We are going to get your insight into profanity first. This was a week where it was the F word that everyone was talking about at the start of the week. Not fudge, not fandango. I can't even say it here on TV. The CRTC won't allow me to say it, but we're going to play you the clip of the Premier getting a little frustrated with a discussion about the family doctor shortage and the healthcare crisis in British Columbia. Let's take a listen to that.
The opposition characterizes cooperative federalism, making our country work by ensuring that there's adequate funding. Do you want to hear it, man? Do you want to hear it, or do you just want to hear your voice? Why don't you go in the bathroom and talk to yourself in there, because you don't want to hear answers in this place. Seriously. The Canada Health Transfer is fundamental to health care in British Columbia. It's fundamental, and it has been for generations. Do you care? Do you really care? Or do you want to hear yourself? Do you want a headline or do you want action?
I don't think I've heard a Premier use that word on the floor of the House. Maybe in the hallways, for sure, but not on the floor. What do we make of it? What happened? The reaction? Maclean, why don't we start with you?
Profound thoughts about profanity. Look, the Premier he made a pretty serious mistake there. You are explicitly not allowed to use what's called unparliamentary language in the legislature. And the F-bomb, which I think was fandango, definitely and explicitly counts. Look, the Premier had a reputation before becoming the Premier of having a bit of a quick temper. And that's what happened on Monday. He was prodded by some persistent questions on a very sensitive subject. The doctor shortage is a real crisis. And he lost his cool. He lost his temper. You wrote very well, I thought, Rob, about it's maybe a sign that the Premier is starting to get a little tired. It's a demanding job for anyone, let alone somebody who has had cancer diagnosis and treatment. And, letting the opposition get to him on a stage when he should have been expecting it is quite frankly surprising from a politician with as much experience and as effective as the Premier has been.
Yeah, it was a bit surprising, I think. Katy, how do you think it was handled? You've worked for premiers. Sometimes they say dumb things. In this case, there was a tweet put out by the Premier right afterwards talking about if his mother was still alive, she'd come down there with a bar of Irish Spring soap and wash his mouth out. I thought it struck a pretty good balance of humor and crisis comms, but what did you make of how all that was handled?
Well, just off the top, who hasn't wanted to tell somebody to F off in the legislature? Frankly, I want to tell you guys to F off all the time, but Czech won't let us, and Rob wants us to be nice.
It's a huge fine. I can't afford to pay it.
But anyways, in terms of comms...
I lose track.
Yeah, that's it. In terms of communications, I think in terms of the execution, it was smart. I thought the tweet about Irish soap was a little bit eye-rolling, but it's certainly on Horgan's folksy brand, and the apology was given in a timely manner. I do agree with what Maclean said, and Rob, your piece was great in terms of getting tired, and it's showing. I also don't really buy for a second that this outburst could be attributed to his passion for healthcare. But what I want to talk about is Trevor Halford, because it was Trevor Halford who was asking the questions. And I think that he is proving to be one of the BC Liberals' most effective critics. He got under the Premier's skin. He has effectively held Minister Malcolmson to account. He is a very skilled communicator. And he's demonstrated real passion and dedication on the mental health and addictions file. So my message to BC Liberals is recruit more Trevor Halfords in the next election. We need it.
Jillian, what did you think of all this?
Well, first, I just want to say that I think the F-bomb overshadowed the premier telling Trevor Halford to go talk to himself in the bathroom. Like, that didn't get as much coverage as I thought it should have, because I just think that it's a funny image. But yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously inappropriate. I actually think that it was, for me, it was one of the first times that we saw the sort of humor, like, premier dad shtick, to kind of cover up a blunder like this start to wear a little bit thin. Like, I didn't see it received as positively as perhaps it had been in the past. And, I think that kind of thing works really well until it doesn't. And we're starting to get to the point where, the Liberals, or sorry, the NDP continuing to blame the Liberals, blame the federal government, blame others, anyone but themselves for, shortfalls in services for British Columbians is starting to sort of catch up with them. And yeah, I think that it might be time for them to sort of take a look at that strategy and get a little bit more serious, because I think that maybe what would have gone over a little bit better is just showing some compassion for how scary it is for people to not have a family doctor, to feel like, our healthcare system that we pay a lot for is not there to take care of them. It's very serious. I think it also shows that the NDP feels very vulnerable on this issue. The Greens have been doing a good job, I think, raising it. They held a town hall this week that had almost 400 people attending. It's a good issue for signing for First Note to build our profile. And like Katie outlined, I think the Liberals have done a good job with the criticism of it as well. So starting to show some cracks, I think, on this issue.
Big issue. Jeff, how did you think this all played out?
Question period isn't typically a learning place, but I suspect if we did an experiment where we put an average British Columbian sitting next to the premier in the legislature and made them sit through a question period, I suspect they might come to the same conclusions that the premier did on Monday. Question period as it exists today is terrible. In fact, there's only one thing I hate more than question period: skim milk and the opposition's contrived outrage. Look at the BC Liberals.
Skim milk?
It pretends to be milk and it's not. The BC Liberals howled with outrage over a swear word. Does anyone believe that outrage was real? No, they do not. Because it's not 1950. Because Boss Johnson isn't the Premier of British Columbia. Guy Lombardo isn't topping the charts. Wayne and Schuster aren't the CBC's breakout stars. Go to a coffee shop anywhere in BC and you'll hear people saying what the Premier said in question. People have moved on. If I have one regret about this whole thing, is that Premier Horgan responded to this kerfuffle by apologizing. I would have preferred him to say, "I regret nothing, the end."
But then we have premiers in the House dropping F-bombs all over. It'd just be like a street brawl in there with all the... technically you're not allowed to do it. I thought it was funny, just before this happened, the premier introduced a 10-year-old that he discovered in the rotunda on the way to the chamber. Said, "Hey, welcome to the legislature. By the way, F this." And then there's 5 kids I counted in the chamber that day who went away to school the next morning with words they couldn't use in class, which I thought was kind of funny. But
teachers, don't bring your children to question period. They will learn nothing.
Also,
let them watch Check,
too,
because we also can't say that word.
Yeah.
No, that's right. What was that TV show? You can't say that on television, and you got hit with all the green slime if you said it. But anyways, it is a big kerfuffle, and it did mask a larger issue, which we should talk about next, which is the family doctor crisis. This has been going on for a long time. I remember, I think it was a 2013-ish promise for a family doctor for every British Columbian in a certain number of years. Hasn't got any better. Not only do we have the family doctors closing, the walk-in clinics are closing, the urgent and primary care network that the government's trying to create is full the moment it opens every morning in big centers like Surrey and Victoria. It takes like weeks to get an appointment at Life Labs to get your blood work done, if you need that done. Systems under strain from COVID and all these things. How big of a political issue is this for the government, and how interested is the public in this, do you think? Katie, why don't we go to you first on that?
Yeah, let's move from the humorous to the more serious. This is a huge challenge for the NDP and a massive opportunity for the BC Liberals. Having the longest wait times in the country to see a doctor, particularly in Victoria, where the legislature is situated, is not great. I would say Premier Horgan did not do himself any favors this week, not with the swearing piece, but he had a tweet and a comment on CFAX that essentially blamed immigrants and newcomers to British Columbia because they didn't bring their family doctor with them. Not only is that a communications problem, but history is not on the NDP's side either with this. So CBC published a great article this week. It was a reminder that in 1991, the NDP government at the time wouldn't allow immigrant physicians to practice in British Columbia, and international medical students had to leave the province after graduation. That won't age well. But for me, at a macro level, like lawmakers at all levels need to have a very serious post-COVID conversation about innovation in healthcare. And that starts, in my view, with an outright rejection of the status quo and the single-payer system. And shameless plug alert, so I'm moderating the main stage panel at the Canada Strong and Free Network in Ottawa next week. That's next Friday, with former premiers Gordon Campbell and Darrell Dexter, the former head of the CMA, and a UK expert in European models to discuss where Canada needs to go on healthcare transformation. I think this is a really critical discussion, so tune in.
All right, good points, Katie. Jillian, what do you make of all this?
Well, I think they're aware of the issue in terms of people not being able to access primary care. That's why they've created the urgent and primary care centers. It's just the issue is that they're not really filling the gap, because what's missing is longitudinal care, where people, have a long-term relationship with a doctor. It's a higher level of care. They know, your history, are better able to, just deliver care, basically. We actually have a higher ratio of family doctors in BC to the population than we ever had. The problem is just that only about half of them, less than half, are actually working as GPs, because the funding model is so broken. GPs in BC make lower than the national average, despite much higher cost of living and much higher cost of doing business. In many cases, 40% of their salary is going to overhead. So this needs an overhaul. It's a huge problem. It's a big systemic issue. And like Katie pointed out, it goes all the way back to the 90s. Where I disagree is I don't know if the Liberals are well positioned to take advantage of it, because I think, the NDP's been doing a really good job of sort of framing Falcon as a, cut taxes, cut services type guy. And I think given the economic headwinds that we're facing, the Liberals are going to have a hard time running on anything else. It'll be really interesting to see what they come up with. But yeah, I think for me, I think it's a better issue for the Greens than it is for the Liberals.
For sure. I'm not sure what the Liberal solution is, although I guess maybe they don't need to have a solution at this point in opposition. You just kind of point the government isn't doing it right. Jeff, what do you think of the political kind of weaknesses that this exposes, this issue?
Well, first of all, I'm just excited that we're talking about healthcare and not COVID. Hooray for the panel. This is exciting. But look, on the issue, it's a serious one. When British Columbians are sick, they want to be able to get help fast, close to home. I can tell you that government understands, and all governments have understood, that this is one of those ballot box issues. It's one of those, core basics for people. Can I get access to healthcare when I need it? It's probably the health issue that it's most vote determining for people come election time. So this is right on the government's agenda. It was on the previous government's agenda. I think the difference between the two is that the previous government had a hashtag GP for me, and the current government has work to do, but it has a plan and it's doing the work. It's training more health workers, including doctors. It's fast-tracking accreditation of internationally trained health workers. It has established new alternative pay models for physicians. Those are in place, so new physicians who just want to care for people, don't want to have to be running a business, don't have to worry so much about administration and overhead. It's usually salary-based or patient number-based. And the government has opened 27 new urgent primary care centers across BC. I know there's been a lot of talk about waits. I was at the Vancouver one just last night with a family member and was in and out in 45 minutes. So, wow. The opposition has been quick with the minister. Well, you stand up in your place and do the right thing and admit that you're a failure. But if the opposition is going to seize on this, they need to come forward with some ideas, with some alternate solutions, and not just finger pointing.
Yeah. Good points. Maclean, what do you think?
I think this is, we started this conversation by talking about the premier dropping an F-bomb. And I think the reason he got so frustrated is because this is such an important and I think particularly sensitive issue for the NDP. Look, what voters expect, even on just like a subconscious level, certain parties to sort of own certain files. The NDP, the last provincial election we just had, was essentially contested over the issue of healthcare and pandemic management. Healthcare is something that the NDP, public healthcare, hold near and dear to their hearts. And so if there is a perception that things are not going well, and they aren't, 1 in 5 British Columbians not having a family doctor is simply not acceptable. This is a problem. This would be a problem along the lines of the economy tanking under a BC Liberal government or a BC Green government that was doing terribly on the environment. So this is an existential crisis for the NDP. It's a life and death threat. If they are not perceived to be able to handle something like public health care well, a lot of people who may consider changing their minds in the next election may well do so.
Mm-hmm. I do think it's a smart political move for the premier to pick a fight with Ottawa on the issue. That's never really a bad thing for any premier to do when there's a crisis that's too big to solve instantly. You start throwing grenades at Ottawa.
It's not just this premier. It's all of the premiers.
Sure, yeah, we've been talking about it forever, the health transfer and the...
Jason Kenney, next door in Alberta, he and John Horgan politically have a lot of differences, but on this one, they're on the same page. And all the premiers are on the same page because the issue is Ottawa has backed off. One of the big issues, it's not the only issue, but one of the big issues is that Ottawa is investing less in healthcare as a proportion of health spending than it has in its history. And that's creating all kinds of problems for people and communities looking for care, and it needs to be fixed.
Okay, next topic. An all-party committee of MLAs studying the systemic racism and policing issues in the province came back with an enormous report that recommended dropping the RCMP, creating a provincial police service in British Columbia, amongst a number of other big suggestions, regional policing, mental health options, all sorts of things there. Jeff, let's go to you first on this. What did you make of the ideas in this report? That government doesn't have to implement them, but they're certainly big ideas.
Here's some good things, and then I'm going to close with what I think is a big challenge. Some good things is that by all accounts, you had MLAs from all parties working together, common cause to address a challenge and come up with some common solutions. And so I congratulate the committee, the all-party committee, all the parties involved for this work, and for stating in a clear, strong voice that systemic racism exists in policing as it does elsewhere across society, and that it needs to be addressed and now, and that policing needs to be more responsive to communities. The challenge I have is that their solution of moving to a provincial police force from RCMP seems to me that it's going to make what they want to achieve more difficult. You move from one police institution to a new one, that is a huge logistical and economic and financial challenge. It's going to take years. It's going to divide communities. It's going to, you think of, you have to buy new squad cars. You have to get new headquarters. You have to get new IT. You have to get rid of cost sharing with the federal government that makes policing affordable. And at the end of the day, you're going to have the same police officers in the ranks because the new force will recruit from the old force. We've seen it in places like Surrey, and I suspect that's what will happen here. So, my sense is that I would want for the recommendations that the committee made about culture and leadership to be the top priorities within the existing system, because every second we spend on transforming institutions is a dollar, and a second we're not spending on addressing the core issues.
The argument from the committee, Jillian, was that you try to influence the RCMP and get some changes, and you just send a note to Ottawa and nothing ever happens. They're not responsive to either the province or the mayors once you sign a 20-year policing contract, of which BC's 10 years into. Does that argument make sense when we start talking about this issue?
Some sense for sure. I mean, you look back to the struggles that the city of Vancouver had implementing the safe injection sites when Stephen Harper was prime minister. The federal government took the city to court. So, often we do things a little bit differently out here on the West Coast. This is a very progressive vision for policing and community safety. And I suspect that, the committee has good reason to suggest to believe that there will be significant roadblocks to working with the RCMP to implement a vision like this, because I don't think it's lost on them how difficult it will be to create a new force, particularly because they have the example of what Surrey's been going through to try and get that done in a smaller jurisdiction. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert on this issue, so I think there's reasons why it could also make it easier. If it is it could be cheaper potentially to do hiring from scratch than it would to sort of, potentially lay people off who might not be on board with such a significant culture shift, that sort of a thing. But, I think there, like Jeff said, there's lots of other stuff in this report that they can move ahead with before figuring out the details of that particular piece. In particular, the mental health funding and shifting more to more resources to help people struggling with mental health crises instead of just having the police respond. Lots in there that can get working on right away.
Okay, we got 1 minute left. Katy or Maclean, either of you want to jump in for a quick take?
I'll pick up, like Jeff and I have some synergies here just in terms of the cost and the process that it will take. Like, I agree, this is not a quick, painless, cheap fix. Alberta is going to be on the hook if they continue to pursue their provincial police force. It's $500 million for training alone. Changing patches and decals will cost $2 billion. And federal funding that's tied to smaller regions, it'll end up costing the province more to service communities with populations under 10,000. So I think it's just important to get the facts and consider options. I think everyone wants to move to a more holistic approach to policing, one that incorporates things like mandatory drug treatment alternatives to jail. But let's get the facts and move forward in a reasonable manner.
One interesting wrinkle is in the federal mandate letter for the Justice Minister, there's a review of contract policing there, maybe a signal that Ottawa isn't keen on doing this federal police force until the rest of time. So there might be some dynamics at play there as well. Maclean, we'll leave it there. We got to jump out of the show. We've run out of time. Thank you to the panel for being here. Thank you to you for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast for audio extras. If you're watching Check TV, stick around for This Is Mancolor with Mo Amir is coming up next. Thanks for being here. We'll be back next week on Political Capital.